Hi everybody, TJ Mac Vintage Cards and Nostalgia here, and in today's video I'm doing episode 4 of my AFL case build. And this is a series where I'm putting together a 30 card case of legends that played in the AFL, which was a league that was around from 1960 to 1969, and then starting in 1970 the AFL and NFL merged. So this is a league that is, I think, somewhat forgotten. Many of the stars that played in this league, certainly the ones that didn't play in the NFL, are not as well remembered. So I think this series is going to bring some light on these excellent players that played during this era. So the first card I looked at in episode 1 was Lance Alworth, who in my view is the greatest player to play in the AFL. The second episode we looked at Rich Tombstone Jackson, a defensive end. It says tackle here, but he was a defensive end in the AFL. We also looked at the Mad Bomber Daryl Lamonica, who started with the Buffalo Bills, but he gained the most notoriety playing for the Oakland Raiders, where he led them to a Super Bowl appearance. And then in the last episode, we did a player that is not very well remembered in the AFL, and that's Bill Groman. His career ended early with injuries, but he was a dominant wide receiver who scored 29 touchdowns in his rookie and second year combined, which is still an NFL record for the first 2 seasons to start a career. And you have to remember in the AFL they only played 14 game seasons back then. So it's very remarkable that a player like Groman could put up those types of numbers. This episode we're going to look at 2 players. The first is Junius, or Buck Buchanan is how he's better known. This is his 1964 Topps rookie card. Now, Buchanan has some special notoriety in football history. He was the first black player to ever be taken number 1 overall in a draft for professional football. Now, he was a 6'7", 270-pound defensive tackle who played his entire career with the Kansas City Chiefs from 1963 to 1975, and he only missed 1 game in his career. He was an all-AFL second-team defensive tackle, a 6-time first-team All-Pro, and was selected as one of the 7 defensive tackles on the NFL 100th anniversary all-time team. So he's up there with guys like Mean Joe Green, Alan Page, and many of the greats that played that position. Now, as I said, he was made history by being the first African-American selected first overall in a professional draft. He came from a historically black college, Grambling University, where he played for the legendary Eddie Robinson, who called him the greatest lineman he ever saw. Now, he was blessed with tremendous size and speed. He was one of those sideline-to-sideline players who was known to also smack down many balls because he had that long wingspan, being 6'7". Now, John Madden said guys his size typically played on the outside at defensive end, but Buchanan revolutionized the game by playing on the inside. And Al Davis said that he drafted Hall of Fame offensive guard Gene Upshaw in 1968 just to stop Buchanan. Now, Upshaw would be the first to admit it didn't always work out that way. He was just so big and so strong. Now, Buck was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 1990, and he played for just some fantastic Chiefs defenses in the 1960s that featured 5 Hall of Famers. In addition to Buchanan, you had Bobby Bell, Emmett Thomas, Johnny Robinson, who Emmett Thomas and Robinson played in the defensive backfield, and then Bell, and then also William Lanier were the linebackers. So you had 5 Hall of Famers on that defense. A great team that won the Super Bowl against the Minnesota Vikings in Super Bowl IV, 23-7. So that's the first player we're going to look at today, Buck Buchanan. I'll flip over the back of the card so you can see it. I'm a big fan of the 64 Topps set. I just like the stars that go around the player image on the outside of the card, and then it's just got a nice back on it as well. Second player we're going to look at today is Tobin Rote. This is his 1963 Flair card. He was a quarterback with the San Diego Chargers, but he had quite a long history before he appeared in the AFL. He was one of the first two-way threats, meaning running and passing at the quarterback position. He's the only quarterback in football history to win both an AFL and NFL championship. He played in the NFL from 1950 to 1959 with the Packers and the Lions. Then he goes to the CFL from 1960 to 1962 and plays with the Toronto Argonauts, where he broke several passing records there. Then from 63 to 64, he plays with the Chargers, and then finishes his career in 1966 with the Broncos. Now, when he retired, he was the NFL's all-time leading rusher for quarterbacks with 3,128 yards, and then he was also the all-time leading quarterback in rushing touchdowns with 37. He's still 12th all-time in yards and 5th in rushing touchdowns. Rote could throw the ball too, leading the NFL in passing yards in 1956 and touchdown passes in 1955 and 1956. Now, in 1963, he led a very potent Chargers offense that had players like Lance Alworth on it, and Paul Lowe, and Keith Lincoln. It was just a great Chargers offense, and they demolished the Boston Patriots 51-10 in the AFL championship game. So I'm going to flip over the back of Rote's card here because I think it has a nice little bio on the back of him here. It says here, the Chargers achieved a coup in signing the 13-year veteran, one of the great quarterbacks of the modern era. He has gained 25,022 yards passing and isn't one of those fragile quarterbacks who has to be handled daintily. Tobin is a bruising runner in his own right, with a career average of 4.9 yards per carry. He led the NFL in rushing average one season, 6.9 and 51, and also scored 11 touchdowns one year. Now here's Tobin Rote with the Detroit Lions and his 59 Topps card. As I mentioned, he won an NFL championship, and he did so with the Detroit Lions in 1957, filling in for the injured Hall of Fame quarterback Bobby Lane. He led the Lions to a 4-1 record down the stretch. They came back against the 49ers in the divisional playoff game after trailing 24-7 at the half. This is a great story. Rote said in an interview years later that through the thin walls of the adjoining locker rooms, the Detroit players could hear the 49ers with their big lead celebrating at halftime. We could hear them laughing. The walls were paper thin, and they were going on about how they're going to spend their championship game money. It made us angry. The Lions roared back in the second half, scoring 3 touchdowns in 4 minutes and 29 seconds to win 31-27. Then they annihilated the Cleveland Browns in the NFL championship game, which featured rookie running back Jim Brown, 59-14. Rote threw 4 touchdown passes and ran for another. He's a guy that some think should be in the Hall of Fame, just one of those outstanding quarterbacks from that era. And I certainly think he should deserve some consideration. And I think he's one of those guys that, whether he's in the Hall of Fame or not, is a great player, and I'm happy to have him in my collection. So that's today's episode 4 of our AFL case build. I hope you enjoyed, and we'll talk again soon.